Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Adrian Spendlow, and I'm here to do a story about my father, the engine driver in the old steam days. And I'm starting 3 billion years ago, when the great, huge forests fell into the marshes and sunk down deep into the ground and were crushed and became that thing that makes the steam engines work, which is, of course, coal. So I am going to be telling you stories of my father, Ronnie Spendlow, who worked on the railways in Britain. But you can't have steam trains unless you've got mines, coal mines. There have been coal mines at least since the 14th century, when the Hopi First Nation people were gathering coal and burning it. But it's like a burning stone, and it is mined all over the world, even now, and it is a very dangerous occupation. Many have suffered and many have died, and miners would be trapped miles beneath the earth and would be stuck in darkness with the air disappearing. And miners say that they still hear knock, knock, knock as people are trying to escape from trapped areas from hundreds of years before. But I am here to tell you about my father and his experiences as a steam engine driver. He started young, and he started as a cleaner and then a fireman and then eventually a driver. And it was his job as the fireman to get that coal from the huge tender and shovel it on his great long handle shovel into the firebox, where it would burn and it would turn the water to steam, which would drive the engines and drive that fire and train engine to go from the fire that he said that he could hear the noises within the coal, the ghosts of the coal, the knocking, the tapping, the wheezing and the coughing, those ghostly spirits of long, long, long ago, still trapped there within the coal as he shoveled to fill it with steam. And I have had a connection with steam trains all of my life since I was very young. When I was 3 years old, I drove a steam engine. Well, I started it. Well, I sat on one of the shelves inside the cab, and I turned the handle and the engine started up, and the train went out of the loco sheds with the steam rising and the fire burning and the smell of the smoke, and it went out onto the lines. I think actually I just twitched a handle on a cupboard, but I thought I was starting a train. And from then on I have loved trains, and my father and our family would always have that connection with trains, and we would go off on vacation and we would travel on a train. And I used to be very proud of my father as an engine driver, and I would look up to him as his son because he knew so much. The windows, where you pull the leather strap with the holes in to cause the window to open in the door so it gets air into the place. Now, when we first went on those carriages, those train cars, there were compartments with 2 rows of seats, and you got in and that was you in there for the journey. You were in trapped really until you got to the next station, and then they developed with the corridor as well. Well, I like that. I used to march up and down the corridor feeling very pleased with myself, and there would be other passengers in that compartment with us, and they were trapped with us and had to put up with us. Now my father, he would go to the end where there was a hidden, at the end of the corridor, there was a hidden cupboard, and he would get out a folding table, and he would bring it, and it would clip into brass fittings, and then the leg would come out and fit into a brass fitting on the floor, very much like the ones in the carriages here. And then we had a table, and the other travellers, they would be very impressed with us. They would have to put up with our noise, though, of course, because we would be playing cards, we would play Go Fish and cheat, and we'd get all very excited, cheats! And making loads of noise and laughing and joking and messing about. And I remember this one old guy in particular, very stiff-stayed old kind of a chap, and we had to put up with each other's smells because he smoked a pipe and the whole compartment was full of the smell of the smoke from his pipe. And he had to put up with all our noise. But then we would get our revenge with the smells caused by our pack-up, our packed lunch. When my father said in some areas it was called me bait, and in other areas of Britain it was called me snap, because they got it in a tin and the lid snapped shut. But we had our sandwiches were quite smelly. We had fish paste sandwiches, and they really stunk when you're a kid. And they open up, oh dear. But the worst sandwiches of all were the tomato sandwiches. Now when they were made, they were white bread with margarine, and then crisp, fresh slices of tomato put into the sandwich. And they didn't travel well. My mother got them out in that train compartment, they were pink. The juice from the tomatoes had got squashed in and had soaked into the bread, and the whole sandwich was pink and floppy. At least we were eating them on a train. It was a lot worse when you were eating them at the seaside, on the beach, because the wind would blow and the sand would get on your pink soggy sandwiches, and then they were gritty as well. But at least we could have a drink. Right. My mother and my Auntie Ruth, they had a thermos flask full of hot, sweet, milky tea. My father and my Uncle Jim, they drank their tea in the same way as they did when they were at work. They had a glass bottle with a cork in, with ice cold sweet black tea in it, and they would drink straight from the bottles, they would. And we had a Tupperware, a plastic cup with a lid on, the Tupperware lid, and you would pop the lid off, and inside was milk. And it was very warm, and it had been travelling for a very long time, and was shaken up, and it smelt, and it had shaken that much that it had started turning to butter, and it had little lumps of butter floating about in the milk, and then we had to drink it. The thing that really smelt out of the food, though, was the boiled egg. And I recall we got our eggs out, and they were all still in the shells, and my mother put a handkerchief onto the table, and she said, that's for your bits of your shell. And we got the egg, and we cracked our eggs to crack all the shell, and then we'd break the shell off and put it into this hanky, and then we could eat our boiled egg. Well, I got my egg, and I cracked it on the table in the carriage, and cracked the egg, and then I went like that, and the egg, the boiled egg, shot out of the shell, bounced onto the table, rolled along the table to the other side, and then off the edge of the table, and there was the old man, and he was just filling his pipe with tobacco. And my egg landed in his tobacco pouch, and he lifted up his tobacco pouch, this old man, and he got the egg out, and it was all brown with bits of tobacco stuck all over it. And he looked at me and he said, I believe this is yours. Thank you. And these holidays we went on with my father, they were a bit of what in Britain I would call a busman's holiday. That's where a guy drives a bus all day for a living, and when he goes on holiday, he goes on a coach trip. So it's no different, really. And that was that expression fitted my father very well, because he drove trains all day, and then when we went away for our vacation, we went on a train to travel. We also stayed in a railway carriage. We would go over the border from England into Wales, and there was the car, the compartments of an old train, all converted into a residential holiday, a little chalet. And it was by a lake on a mountainside, and you could look down and see the sea far below, and we would have our holidays in there. So my father worked on the trains all day, he travelled on the trains for his holiday, and he stayed in one as well. And they would set to on an evening, and my mother and my Auntie Ruth, they would drink quite a lot of wine. And my father and my Uncle Jim, they would drink quite a lot of beer. Now we would play a few games of cards, and then they wanted rid of us, so they would get us settled ready for bed. I'd be in my pyjamas with my dressing gown, and then Uncle Jim would sit there with us and tell us how the carriage was haunted. This old railway carriage we were having our holiday in, it still had one of the railway staff in it, and he said that when you were laid in your bed of a night, you would wake and feel that the whole carriage was moving, and the ticket collector would be coming along the corridor to the door of your bedroom with his ticket snippers, and if you weren't careful, he would snip at your ears, and you would hear the train, chuckety-chug, chuckety-chug, chuckety-club, chug, clippity-clip, clippity-clip, clippity-clip. Mind your ears, the ticket collector would click your ears. Now it's time for you to go to bed. He would say, "Well, go off. I was only about 4. Thank you very much." And my mother, of course, was drinking wine by this point. And she'd say, "I know normally I take you up to bed and I read your stories, but tonight is a bit different because your older sister is going to take you to your bedroom. Now don't worry, I put a pile of your favourite books by the bed, so you'll be all right. She'll read from those. So off we go. Thank you very much. Good night, Mummy. Good night, Auntie Ruth." And off I went to my bit of bedroom, and my sister got me in my bed, and then she said, "I'm not going to be reading you stories. What I'm going to do tonight is sing to you." And she would sing. I'd say, "Okay, thank you very much." Now then, I can't sing, and I'm going to sing now, and I apologise for it. But she couldn't sing either, so it's a very accurate rendition. And she was not a cheerful singer either. The songs were things like "Hockers and mussels, alive, alive, oh. Her ghost wheels her barrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh." It just got worse, it did. After that it would be "Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be." And then she would sing, "Oh my darling, oh my darling, oh my darling Clementine, you hit your foot against a splinter, fell into the foaming brine. You are lost and gone forever, oh my darling Clementine." And while I'm shivering with fear and thinking about the idea of death and ghosts, she would then finish off on a normal monthly attempt at telling us stories, singing her songs. She would sing, "Hang down your head, Tom Dooley, hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley, tomorrow you're going to die." And she would say, "That's the end of the singing, see? All you have to do now is say good night and thank you very much." No, "Good night, thank you very much." And she would go off and leave me alone like that. Well, that's when she stood in for my mother when we were at home, when my auntie came to visit. When we were in the railway carriage, it was slightly different. Then she would add in "Piggy on the railroad, picking up stones. Along came the engine driver and broke Piggy's bones. Hey," said Piggy, "that's not fair." "Ho ho," said the engine driver, "I don't care." And then you could see the driver roll as he shovelled on the coal, and the black smoke would come pouring from the stacks as they thundered through the sky. I am here to testify. You could hear the wheels a-clicking on the track, then a loud and rushing roar like you've never heard before turns the blood to icy water in your veins as you watch with rising fear. Something strange was drawing near, and there you see in the cloud, ghost train, ghost train, ghost train. What a fearful sight. Ooh, ghost train, roaring through the night. Ooh. There, say good night and thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much, Jenny. Good night. Thank you. You leave me all alone. And I was laid in my bed, not really able to sleep, and I look out of the carriage window, and there is the moon rising slowly through the sky and shining in my bedroom, and I'm trying to get to sleep, and after quite a while I would feel like the carriage was moving, the door was shaking, there was a click, click, click. It's the ghost of the ticket collector come to get me. And the handle on my door was clickety, 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 clicking. And then the door opened. And it was my sister. I've been dreaming about the ghostly ticket collector. Can I sleep in your room, please? And she would sit in the chair in my room and sleep. So she actually got more frightened of the ghost stories than I did. I'm from York, and there you've got the National Railway Museum. Of course, it's a totally different thing here. The word national, if a museum in Britain says National Art Gallery or whatever, it means it's free. The government has funded it. This is the National Railroad Museum, and it relies on the tickets from people coming in and the donations. So if you enjoy yourself tonight, please do leave a donation in the donation box in the shop, in the store there as we go. And my father, a couple of years before he died, we had a friend and she wanted a tour of the National Railway Museum in York. So we went with my father and he took us round and he had a story for every engine, every carriage, every piece of equipment. I think he was 87 at the time. And as he was walking around and telling us all these stories, we started gathering a crowd. And all the people who would visit the museum that day all thought he was an official guide. And we had a crowd with us going round. And he took us on a tour of the whole of the place. Now, he was very proud of the fact that he had worked every engine in there, either as a fireman or as a steam train driver. He had worked, he said, every engine in there except the Mallard. And I said, well, actually, Dad, I'm not really sure that you will have driven the Bullet, because it is a Japanese train. But he said, well, all right, I didn't drive that one. And I said, and there's a model here of the rocket, Stephenson's rocket, that broke world records in 1829. I don't think you drove that one either. And he said, no, all right then, not them two either, but all the rest. And he was always very upset about the Mallard, because it was the world record-breaking train, and it was a really sleek, wonderful thing, very similar to the Dwight Eisenhower here in its build and design, which of course was built in Britain. And he was always upset. But the Stephenson's rocket, that was made by the Stephensons, who also, they created Loco number 1. The Stockton to Darlington Railway was the first public railway in the whole of the world. They were the first people to take passengers. It was a very dangerous business, it was. That train was so dangerous that what you had to do was have a man walk in front of it with a red flag, like that. After a few weeks of travelling like that and realising it possibly wasn't quite as dangerous as imagined, they gave him a horse. And he rode on his horse with the red flag in front of the engine all the way like that. Because if a train goes over 20 miles an hour, it turns the brain to mud. They changed their minds a few years later, but that was how they went on for quite a long time. And that was like a world record-breaking train, Stockton to Darlington. Now, I had the dubious honour of being asked to be a tour guide telling the history of the town of Stockton. And I went to the town of Stockton and I took crowds of people 2 or 3 times a day for a week, all the way around the town telling the history, and I'd never been in the town before in my life. I got off the train and an hour later I was taking people around. And how it had come about was they'd booked me to just do a short story in the middle of the tour, and another guy was doing the tour guiding, and he took ill. So like with a week's notice, they sent me this information and said, you've got to do it. And I was nervous as anything. I was really worried sick. And I get there and I go to the town hall for the start of my talk, and there's this big group of elderly women come out of the town hall and joining me. They said, we're here to do your guided tour. Yeah, and I said, yeah, I knew you were. Yeah. They said, we are the tour guides for the town hall. We're the experts on the history of Stockton. So my very first trip around Stockton was with all these historical experts. But I got away with it. Within 5 minutes they were saying, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I'd never heard that. And one thing they'd never heard was that the Bishop of Durham had got a scribe in to describe the law that he was declaring, that Stockton should be declared a farm, which kind of meant an area, really, like a city, and that it should be ruled by a major. And the scribe spelt it wrong, and he spelt it with a Y. So he put in the law that the town should be ruled by a mayor. And that's the reason we have them. There wasn't any mayors anywhere in the world until he wrote that down, and that's how suddenly every town has one. And I'm walking around and I'm telling them all this. And also, there'd been a big presentation. Here we are, Stockton, the town that's famous for being the very first public railway service in the whole of the world. And how it started was, there was a city gathering, and they all had a big meal, and then they all gave speeches. And after everybody had given speeches, this young drunk man stood up and said, "I propose that Stockton has a canal." And the whole audience went, and then he went, "Or a railway," and they all went, "Yay!" And that's how we got the first public railway in Stockton. Now the Mallard is famous for being the first train to hit 100 miles an hour. And my father was always upset he'd never driven that train, but he had fired on an engine for the Duke. Marmaduke, Wild Man Pickering. He was quite a character, he was. We're going back to the days where a driver had his own engine, and there was a brass plaque inside the cab, Marmaduke Wild Man Pickering, and it was his engine and nobody else could work the engine, and my father was his fireman. Now, the Duke was quite a character. He had big, long hair that was bright red and a huge, great big, bright red beard, and he was very fastidious in his habits. When they issued a new issue railway shirt, he would change his shirt. He would. Every single time they said, "Here's a new shirt," he would take up the old shirt and put the new one on. They issued new shirts twice a year. So when he took his shirt off, it actually stood up on its own, but he would change it regular. And he would run that engine, and my father would fire for him. And about a week before the Mallard was due to do its attempt at the 100-mile-an-hour record, they got in, running back from Hull, and he said to my father, "You get that firebox as full of coal as you possibly can, because we're going to need a lot of steam." And my father's shoveling away and shoveling the coal in like that, and they're getting it going. By they got to Enthorpe Bank, that train went down that bank and was clocked at travelling at 104 miles an hour. And my dad said, "Are you going to log it to the Duke?" And he said, "No, it would ruin all the publicity if I told him I'd broken the record before the attempt." So nobody ever got to hear it until now. Now it is out. And that was the Duke. And he drove the D20 at that record speed. Now, he was quite a character. And he would work with my father, and he would have my father cleaning and polishing like all the time. When he wasn't firing up the firebox and filling it with coal, he was polishing and cleaning and looking after the valves and making everything shine. And other firemen said, "Why do you work so hard? He picks on you. He makes you do all that work." What they didn't know was, at the end of the shift, when you got back to the loco depot in Bridlington and you parked up your engine, you then had an hour and a half cleaning time allotted. And all of the other firemen and drivers had to set to and start polishing and cleaning. My dad had already done it all while they were travelling. And the Duke lived next door to the depot. So they would climb over the wall to the Duke's house. He would send me dad home and he'd say, "Don't worry, in an hour and a half time I'll climb back over the wall and clock us off in the clocking off machine." So he got finished an hour and a half before everybody else, all the other firemen. So, and he got an easier time with the coal as well. They went one time to collect the coal. And I remember this was at York. There was a great big tall stanchion and it was actually a railway carriage, like an open top box car that was filled with coal and then hoisted up, and that was used and tipped into a chute, and the coal would then go into the tendon on the back of the engine. and fill it up for them. And they stood there waiting to have this done, and the Duke looks around, and there's a great big pile of coal, this big, huge boulders of coal, and there's a great big line of it along the side. And he says to me, Dad, but you know, look at that there. And my dad said, well, I don't know why it's there either. So they went to the guy with the crane, and he said, they're the ones that are too big to go in the chute. They won't fit through the chute, they block it, so we don't use them. But the Duke says, oh, well, can I have them then? Yeah. And he got my father to pick these boulders of coal that big up one at a time and carry them to the cab, and then go back for another one and climb up the steps with that, and they ended up with a cab piled up with huge boulders of coal. And then it had a 14-foot firebox, a gigantic firebox. And what he did was, he got all these boulders and he put them through the fire pit hole, and with his 9-foot long hooked pole, pushed them to the sides, so that there they were at the sides. Then he got the fire built up in the middle. As they were going along, as the fire started dying down, my dad gets the shovel and he's starting to get more coal, and says, the Duke says, there's no need to do that. Here, get your hook. And he got his hook and he reached into the fire pit and he pulled one of the huge boulders onto the fire, and it burnt for the rest of the day. My dad didn't do any more shoveling for the rest of the day. And the next day, they get the fire going, and he'd pull in another boulder. He didn't shovel any coal for nearly a week, except for getting it going first thing in the morning. And he was quite a character with the Duke. He was there in 1947. My dad was still firing back then, before he became a driver. And it was the worst winter that they can remember in Britain. We do occasionally get snow. I don't know if you get much snow around here. We have had winters where it's laid on the ground, white, honestly. Go like an inch deep. Occasionally we get it around York. But in 1947, there was thick snow all winter. I've seen pictures where when they've cleared the roads, that the sides of the road are higher than the buses going through. Even a double-decker bus is going through and the snow is higher. It was a pretty bad winter. And my dad turns up for work one morning, and they've had this really big snowstorm, and he goes in and they said, well, there's no work for you today, you're laid off. And the Duke turns up and they tell him, and he says, why? And he said, well, the snow's so bad. And he said, well, I could get through that, it's all right, you know, it might be like a 3 foot deep on the lines or something, but that's all, I can get going with that. And they said, no, it's the far valley. And if you went up the hill, just beyond the station, there, the valley, the actual valley was full of snow, right to the top, and it had drifted in. So the whole valley was full. So there's no way we can get through. So they go and they sit in the canteen, and they sat there having a cup of tea, and they say, we need you. And they go out, and there's 2 blokes turned up in white coats with clipboards and pens and stopwatches. And they said, we're the inspectors, and we want to go to the top of the hill and inspect the valley so we can assess how long it'll take for the snow to melt, so we can work out when to start running trains again. Get in the cab. So they go, as they're walking towards the cab, my father says, you know, what we're doing here, and the Duke says, you're going to work like mad. You're going to fill that firebox with coal. We're going to have more steam than we've ever had before. And they go in, and he's working away, it's my dad, and they go out of the station, and they're heading towards this hill, and he's got a real full head of steam, and the train's going like really fast, and he's heading towards the top of the hill, and the inspectors are stood in the open-sided cab, stood with him with the clipboards, and they said, yes, if you just go to the top of the hill and then stop. Well, they get up to the top of the hill, they're going at full speed. And he says, you can stop now. And the Duke says, oh, no, we won't. And he went over the top of the hill at full speed, and he went down into the snow-filled valley, pushing the snow out of his way, forcing a tunnel as he went. My dad said it was very strange, that as you push the snow out of the way, it came up the sides and, like, compacted and refroze. So the open sides of the cab, the ice was actually coming in on them. And there's the 4 of them in the cab, and it's getting like smaller and smaller and smaller. And he goes down, and he went up the other side, and they said, for goodness sake, stop. He said, we can't stop now, we're underneath the snow. Keep going, well, keep going. And they went up, and they went up the other side of the hill, and they came out into the open air, and the Duke looked round and said, your line's clear now. He was quite a character, and they weren't always that popular. It's fine being in Bridlington, or York, or Scarborough, but Then there's West Yorkshire, the Wesseys, and the Wesseys don't like the people from East Yorkshire. It's something to do with a war. Now, none of us really remember very much about this war. All we really remember is that they had red roses and we had white roses, and that's about all we can remember. But we do still hate each other. And they're short of workers, and my father and the Duke get sent with their engine to go and take some of the jobs in West Yorkshire. And they get there, and the Duke has got his pack up, he's got his sandwiches and everything, and his bottle of tea, cold tea, and he's just sitting there in the cab. And my father says, well, I'm going to the canteen. Oh, are you now? He says, yeah, there's a nice canteen here, I'll go in. Well, he goes in, this canteen, there's a big roaring fire, and there's tables everywhere, and it's absolutely heaving with drivers and firemen, and they don't like the look of an East Yorkshire man coming in here. Easties, I might